The needle slipped through silk like a whispered secret. Each stitch a prayer I'd been weaving for half a year. French seams, hand-rolled hems, seed pearls I'd sewn one by one until my fingers bled and my eyes burned under the lamplight. The dress spread across my dining table like captured moonlight. Ivory silk charmeuse that had cost me 3 weeks' grocery money, but worth every sacrifice for Catherine's wedding day. At 62, my hands weren't as steady as they'd been when I'd sewn my own wedding dress 4 decades ago, but they were wiser. Each pleat held decades of muscle memory. Every dart shaped by the ghosts of countless alterations I'd done to make ends meet after William died. This dress wasn't just fabric and thread. It was my love letter to my only daughter, the child I'd raised alone after her father's heart attack when she was 12. The morning sun painted golden squares across my kitchen floor as I wrapped the gown in acid-free tissue paper, the way my mother had taught me to preserve precious things. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a woman grown thin from worry and lean from years of stretching every dollar. But my eyes held the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Today, Catherine would see what her mother's hands had created in the silence of countless nights. The Grand Ballroom Hotel rose before me like a wedding cake made of brick and marble. Its valet parking alone costing more than I spent on groceries in a month. Catherine had chosen this venue, or rather her future mother-in-law had chosen it. Despite knowing my modest teacher's pension couldn't stretch to such extravagance, I'd offered to help with the flowers instead to do something within my means. But Brenda Cox had smiled that paper-thin smile of hers and said, "Oh, don't worry about contributing, Mary. We've got everything handled." The bridal suite hummed with expensive chaos. Brenda commanded a team of professionals like a general positioning troops, a makeup artist with a kit that cost more than my monthly rent, a hairstylist whose scissors moved with surgical precision, and a photographer whose camera clicked constantly, capturing every manufactured moment of candid preparation. Catherine sat in the center of it all like a porcelain doll, beautiful and still, while strangers painted and primped and fussed over her. My daughter had always been lovely, but today she looked like someone else entirely. Someone polished to a shine that reflected back only what others wanted to see. "Mom." Catherine's voice carried that particular tone that meant she needed something, but was already preparing to be disappointed by what I could offer. "You're here. Good. We're almost ready for the dress." I lifted the garment bag with the reverence reserved for sacred things. 6 months of evenings after grading papers. 6 months of saving every penny. 6 months of dreaming about the moment my daughter would slip into silk and lace made by her mother's hands. "I brought the dress," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. Brenda looked up from her orchestration of wedding perfection, her gaze settling on my garment bag like a judge weighing evidence. "Oh, the dress you made. How thoughtful." The word thoughtful fell from her lips like a diplomatic apology for something embarrassing but unavoidable. I began to unzip the bag, my fingers trembling slightly, not from nerves but from the intensity of love that had gone into every stitch. The silk emerged like water taking shape and for a moment the room fell silent. "It's..." Catherine began then stopped. "It's very handmade." Brenda finished, stepping closer with the air of someone examining damaged goods. "The detail work is quite rustic." Rustic. 6 months of French seams and hand-embroidered pearls dismissed as rustic. I felt something shift inside my chest. A small door closing. "Catherine, darling," Brenda continued, her voice honeyed with false kindness. "Perhaps we should consider the backup option we discussed. The Vera Wang from the boutique. It's more appropriate for the photographs." Catherine's eyes darted between the dress I'd made and the woman who would soon be her mother-in-law. I watched my daughter weigh her choices like a merchant calculating profit and loss. And I saw the exact moment she chose the path that led away from me. "Mom, I think maybe we should go with the other dress. This one is..." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't cut too deep. "It's just not quite right for the venue." The needle-sharp pain of rejection pierced through 23 years of scraped knees I'd bandaged, nightmares I'd chased away, and dreams I'd encouraged. I folded the dress back into its tissue paper shroud, my movements careful and precise. The way I'd learned to handle disappointment with dignity intact. "Of course," I said. "Whatever makes you happy." I stepped into the hallway to give them privacy, but also to breathe. The corridor's thick carpet muffled the sounds of wedding preparation, but I could still hear voices through the door I hadn't quite closed. "Thank God you came to your senses," Brenda's voice carried clearly. "Can you imagine the photographs? Everyone would wonder where on earth that dress came from." Catherine laughed, a bright, nervous sound that pierced straight through me. "If anyone asks, I'll just say it doesn't fit. It looks like something from a discount rack anyway." The words hit like physical blows. 6 months. 6 months of my life. My love, my hope that I still mattered to the child I'd raised. 6 months reduced to discount rack embarrassment and nervous laughter. I stood in that hotel hallway, dress bag clutched against my chest, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not break. Breaking implied something that could be mended. This was more like evolution, like a snake shedding skin it had outgrown. Through the partially open door, I could see Catherine stepping into the Vera Wang gown, her face radiant with relief. Brenda zipped her up with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully prevented a social disaster. The photographer snapped away, capturing the moment of transformation from daughter to daughter-in-law. While my own creation lay forgotten on a chair like discarded wrapping paper. I walked back into the room with the measured steps of someone who had made a decision. "I'm going to take this home," I said, lifting my dress with newfound purpose. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. Maybe I can wear it to the rehearsal dinner." Catherine's voice carried the hollow ring of consolation prizes and afterthoughts. "No," I said simply. "That won't be necessary." I kissed my daughter's forehead, inhaling the scent of expensive hairspray and borrowed perfume that smelled nothing like the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Have a beautiful wedding, sweetheart." As I walked down the hotel corridor, I heard Brenda say, "Well, that was easier than I expected." Sometimes people just need to accept reality. The elevator doors closed on my old life. In my arms, wrapped in tissue paper and wounded pride, lay the beginning of something else entirely. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of possibility mixed with exhaust fumes and other people's dreams. I placed the dress carefully in my car's back seat, settling it like precious cargo for a journey to an unknown destination. The drive home took me past the neighborhood where I'd raised Catherine alone, past the school where I'd taught for 37 years, past all the familiar landmarks of a life lived in service to others. But today, those places looked different, smaller somehow, as if I'd been seeing them through the wrong lens all this time. My house welcomed me back with its familiar creaks and shadows. The same yellow kitchen walls I'd painted when Catherine started high school. The same photographs chronicling a lifetime of birthdays, graduations, and ordinary Tuesdays that had somehow added up to raising a human being. I spread the dress across my dining room table once more, smoothing the silk with gentle hands. The afternoon light caught the pearls I'd sewn in spiraling patterns across the bodice. Each one placed with the precision of a woman who understood that details mattered even when, especially when no one else noticed. The French seams lay flat and perfect, invisible from the outside, but strong enough to last generations. This was not discount rack work. This was artistry born of love and honed by necessity. I made myself a cup of tea. English breakfast, strong enough to wake the dead, and sat looking at the dress while steam rose from my mug like incense. Somewhere across town, Catherine was walking down an aisle in borrowed elegance. But here in my quiet house, surrounded by the tools of my craft, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the stirring of my own ambition. The phone rang once during my vigil. Probably Catherine calling from her honeymoon suite. Voice bright with champagne and guilt. ready to explain and apologize and make everything smooth again. I let it ring. 3 days passed in merciful silence. No calls from honeymoon. No flowers with apologetic cards. No visits from well-meaning neighbors who'd heard whispers about wedding day drama. Just me, the dress, and the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of my life. I found myself studying the gown with new eyes, seeing it not as rejected love, but as evidence of skill I'd forgotten I possessed. The hand-rolled hem alone represented 40 hours of work that would cost $800 at any decent bridal boutique. The bodice construction, princess seams with French curves, was couture-level tailoring. My mother's voice echoed from memory, "Mary, you have the hands of an artist. Don't waste them on other people's dreams." On Thursday morning, I was photographing the dress from different angles, documenting my work like a crime scene investigator when the doorbell chimed. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with dark curls escaping from a messy bun, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant she wouldn't leave easily. Mrs. Sterling, her voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. "I'm Sophia Martinez. I live in the apartment above the bakery on Maple Street. I heard you might need some company." Sophia. The name conjured a vague memory of Catherine mentioning her years ago. A girl who'd worked at the coffee shop where Catherine studied for her master's degree. They'd been friends, or friendly at least, before Catherine's social circle narrowed to include only people who could advance her husband's career. I opened the door to find a woman of perhaps 28 with paint-stained fingers and the kind of authentic smile that had become foreign to me. She held out the casserole dish like an offering. "Chicken enchiladas," she said. "My grandmother's recipe. I figured you might not be cooking much this week." "How did you?" I began. "Catherine called me," Sophia said simply. 3 nights ago. Crying drunk from her hotel room in Cabo. She told me what happened, what she said about the dress. Her dark eyes flashed with indignation. I wanted to drive over there and slap some sense into her, but Mexico is a little far for an intervention. Despite myself, I almost smiled. "Come in. I was just making coffee." Sophia stepped into my foyer and stopped dead, her gaze fixed on the dress displayed across my dining room. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, then clapped her hand over her mouth. Holy, is that the dress?" "That's the dress." She approached it like a pilgrim approaching a shrine, her fingers hovering inches above the silk. "Mrs. Sterling, this is museum-quality work. The beadwork alone. How long did this take you?" 6 months. 6 months. She turned to face me, her expression shifting from admiration to fury. 6 months of your life, and she called it discount rack quality in front of that ice queen mother-in-law. I found myself nodding, surprised by the relief of having anyone, acknowledge the enormity of the betrayal. "You know what this reminds me of?" Sophia continued, circling the dress like an art critic studying a masterpiece. "That wedding dress Grace Kelly wore. The construction, the attention to detail. This isn't just a dress. It's couture. You know about construction techniques." Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I went to fashion school for about a year before my dad got sick and I had to come home to help with the restaurant. I've been waitressing and doing alterations on the side ever since, but..." She gestured toward the dress. "I've never seen anything like this outside of a museum." Something stirred in my chest, a feeling I'd almost forgotten. Recognition. Professional respect, the acknowledgement of skill by someone who understood the craft. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. We sat in my kitchen, Sophia's enthusiasm filling the space like sunlight through winter windows. She asked detailed questions about my techniques, admired photographs of other pieces I'd made over the years, and listened with genuine interest as I explained the difference between French seams and flat fell seams, the art of setting in sleeves without puckers, the patience required for hand-sewn buttonholes. You know, she said, cradling her coffee mug. My cousin Elena is getting married in 3 months. Her budget is basically non-existent. She's a social worker. Her fiancé teaches kindergarten, and she's been crying about it for weeks. She can't afford anything decent and she's too proud to ask for family money. That's difficult, I murmured, though something in her tone suggested this conversation was heading somewhere specific. She's about Catherine's size, Sophia continued casually. Maybe a little taller, but not by much. The implication hung between us like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I looked through the archway at the dress, remembering the weight of it in my arms as I had carried it away from Catherine's wedding suite. Silk that had never felt the joy it was created for. You think she'd want to wear a rejected dress? I asked. I think she'd cry with gratitude to wear a dress that beautiful, Sophia said firmly. Elena's been looking at polyester disasters online for under $200. This, she gestured toward the dining room. This would make her feel like a queen. That afternoon, Sophia brought Elena to see the dress. My niece, technically my second cousin, but we'd never stood on ceremony about the precise degrees of family connection, walked into my dining room and stopped breathing. Elena had always been the family scrapper, the one who chose social work over law school, who dated teachers instead of doctors, who drove a 15-year-old Honda and still managed to send money to her parents every month. At 31, she'd earned every laugh line around her eyes and every callus on her hands from volunteer work at the shelter. Aunt Mary, she whispered, using the family courtesy title that made my heart squeeze. Did you really make this? I did. For Catherine's wedding. I nodded, watching Elena's face cycle through emotions, wonder, recognition, then a flash of protective anger on my behalf. She didn't wear it. No, she chose something else. Elena reached out to touch the silk, then pulled her hand back as if afraid she might damage something precious. I can't. This is too beautiful, too expensive. It belongs in a wedding that costs $50,000, not a backyard barbecue with folding chairs. Elena, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. This dress was made with love. It was meant to celebrate a marriage, to make someone feel beautiful on the most important day of their life. That someone could be you. Sophia nudged her cousin. Try it on. But try it on, I echoed. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in my bedroom mirror transformed. The dress fit her like it had been made for her body. The silk flowing over her curves with liquid grace. The ivory tone warmed her olive skin and the hand-sewn pearls caught the light like stars. I look. Elena's voice cracked. I look like a real bride. You look like yourself, I said. Just elevated. Sophia pulled out her phone. Hold still. I need to document this miracle. The photo she took captured something magical, Elena's radiant smile, the perfect drape of silk, the way confidence had transformed her posture. In that image, she looked like exactly what she was, a woman in love, wearing a dress made by someone who understood that love should be celebrated, not dismissed. I don't know how to thank you, Elena said, tears making her mascara run slightly. Wear it with joy, I told her. That's thanks enough. But Sophia had other ideas. Actually, she said, her voice carrying that tone of someone about to suggest either brilliance or disaster. I think we should post this photo. Elena looks incredible and people should see what kind of work you do. Sophia, I warned, but she was already typing on her phone. Just on my Instagram. I have like 300 followers, mostly other restaurant people and art students. What's the harm? She posted the photo with a caption that made my chest tight with unexpected pride. When your cousin needs a wedding dress but can't afford couture and your friend's mom happens to be a secret master seamstress. This gown was hand-sewn over 6 months by Mary Sterling, a retired teacher who clearly missed her calling. Elena is glowing and this dress is proof that real artistry exists in the most unexpected places. #handmade couture, #real artist, #wedding dress, #talented women. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Sophia's phone was buzzing constantly with comments, shares, and direct messages. People wanted to know where they could commission similar work. Brides whose weddings were still months away started asking about pricing. Local seamstresses reached out with professional admiration. By evening, the photo had been shared 47 times. By the next morning, it had reached 2,000 views, and Sophia was fielding inquiries from as far away as Seattle and San Francisco. "Mrs. Sterling," Sophia said, arriving at my door with coffee and croissants and an expression of barely contained excitement. "I think we need to talk about starting a business." I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through comment after comment of praise and inquiries, feeling like someone had switched on lights in rooms I'd forgotten existed. For decades, I'd sewn for necessity. Mending clothes, hemming curtains, making Halloween costumes on teachers' salary. But this felt different. This felt like possibility. "I don't know anything about running a business," I said. "But you know everything about making dresses that make women feel like goddesses," Sophia countered. "That's the hard part. The business stuff we can learn." Through my dining room window, I could see Mrs. Patterson walking her dog, the same route she'd taken every day for the 15 years I'd lived in this house. Same time, same pace, same predictable orbit around the neighborhood. 3 days ago, I'd been following my own predictable orbit. Retired teacher, discarded mother, woman whose best years were assumed to be behind her. Now, Elena's photo smiled back at me from Sophia's phone screen, and strangers were asking to pay me for the skills I'd almost let die in silence. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Sophia's grin could have powered the entire block. "I'm suggesting we remind the world that real artists don't always hang in galleries. Sometimes they sit in suburban kitchens, creating magic one stitch at a time." Outside, Mrs. Patterson completed her predictable loop and disappeared into her house. But inside mine, surrounded by thread and dreams and a young woman's infectious enthusiasm, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in decades: freedom. Elena's wedding was 3 weeks away when the call came that changed everything. I was in my converted spare bedroom, now officially my design studio according to the hand-painted signs Sophia had made, sketching modifications for a mother-of-the-bride dress, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Rebecca Thompson from Channel 12 News. I saw the photograph of the wedding dress you made, and I'd like to do a feature story about local artisans. Would you be interested in an interview?" My hand trembled as I set down my pencil. "I'm sorry, what?" The wedding dress photo has been shared over 15,000 times in the past week. People are calling you the hidden couture artist of suburban Portland. We'd love to tell your story. 15,000 times. The number felt surreal, impossible. I thought of nervous laughter echoing in that hotel suite. It looks like something from a discount rack anyway, and felt a satisfaction so sharp it could have cut silk. I'd need to think about it. Of course. But Mrs. Sterling, I saw the dress in person yesterday. Elena Martinez is my hairstylist and she showed me the gown. It's museum quality. People should know about work like that. After hanging up, I sat in the silence of my transformed house. In 3 weeks, I'd taken 7 commissions. Sophia had helped me set up a basic website, calculate pricing that reflected both my skill and my need to eat, and navigate the strange world of social media where strangers complimented my French seams and begged for appointment availability. The phone rang again almost immediately. Mom. Catherine's voice hit me like cold water. We hadn't spoken since the wedding, though I'd heard through family channels that the honeymoon had been perfect and that she and Scott were settling into married life beautifully. Hello, Catherine. Mom, Her voice carried that particular breathlessness that meant she was about to ask for something while pretending to offer it. I heard about the news interview and all the attention you're getting for sewing. I think it's wonderful. Do you? Of course. I always knew you were talented, and I was thinking maybe we could meet for lunch. I have some ideas about how to help you expand this little business. This little business. The phrase landed like a paper cut. Small but surprisingly painful. I'm quite busy these days, Catherine. Oh, I know. That's why I thought we could discuss efficiency strategies. Maybe you could streamline your process. Use different materials that are more cost-effective. Scott has some insights about scaling artisan businesses. He deals with creative entrepreneurs all the time in his consulting work. I closed my eyes, seeing with perfect clarity the conversation Catherine had already had with her husband and mother-in-law. Mary's little sewing hobby was getting attention, which meant it could be useful, but only if properly managed and refined according to their standards. What kind of materials did you have in mind? I asked. Well, nothing too expensive. Maybe synthetic blends instead of silk. And we could source beading wholesale instead of you hand sewing everything. Scott says the key to profitability is reducing labor-intensive processes. Synthetic blends. Don't sound like that, Mom. I'm trying to help. The dress you made for Elena looked lovely, but let's be honest. You can't spend 6 months on every dress if you want to make real money. Real money, as opposed to the imaginary money I was apparently making by charging fair prices for master-level craftsmanship. Catherine, I said carefully. Did you see the news story announcement? That's actually why I called. I think it's wonderful exposure, but you'll want to be careful about how you present yourself. Maybe I could help you prepare for the interview. Make sure you say the right things. The right things, as if my own words describing my own work might not be adequate without her editorial guidance. I'll call you back, I said and hung up before she could respond. Sophia arrived an hour later with Thai takeout and the expression of someone who'd been fielding phone calls all day. Your daughter called me, she announced, setting containers of pad Thai on my kitchen table. Wanted to know if I was encouraging you in this sewing venture, and whether I understood the financial realities of custom work. What did you tell her? I told her that in 3 weeks you've made more money per hour than I make waitressing and that your financial realities include having a waiting list of clients willing to pay premium prices for work they can't get anywhere else. Sophia's eyes flashed. Then I may have mentioned that dismissing museum-quality craftsmanship as a sewing venture showed a fundamental misunderstanding of both art and business. I found myself smiling for the first time all day. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She suggested I might be getting above myself and that it would be unfortunate if I encouraged you to make unrealistic career decisions at your age. At my age. 62 years old, apparently too ancient for new dreams. Sophia, I said suddenly. Do you remember what you wanted to do when you were in fashion school? Before your father got sick. Her face shifted, vulnerability replacing the fierce protectiveness she'd been wearing. I wanted to design clothes for real women. Not size 0 models or celebrities, but women with curves and stories and lives that didn't fit standard patterns. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Naive, right? The professors kept pushing us toward commercially viable designs, clothes that could be mass-produced and marketed to the broadest possible demographic. What if it wasn't naive? What do you mean? I stood up, pacing to the window, where I could see my neighbor's predictable garden, the same flowers planted in the same patterns year after year, safe and unremarkable, and slowly dying from lack of imagination. What if we didn't just take commissions for wedding dresses? What if we actually started a real business? Custom clothing for women who've been ignored by the fashion industry. Sophia set down her fork. Mary, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe a retired teacher and a former fashion student might know something about what real women actually want to wear. I'm suggesting that maybe commercially viable has made fashion boring and soulless, and maybe there's room for something different. The silence stretched between us, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. We'd need capital, Sophia said finally. Equipment, space, materials, a real business license, marketing beyond Instagram posts. I have some savings, I said. And this house. I could take out a home equity loan. Mary, that's your security. Your safety net. No, I said, turning from the window to face her. Catherine was my safety net. My teaching pension was my security. This house was my retreat from the world. But none of those things actually made me safe, did they? Catherine threw away 6 months of my love without a second thought. My pension barely covers my bills. And this house has been a beautiful prison where I've been slowly disappearing. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if looking for signs of temporary insanity or permanent resolve. What would we call it? She asked finally. The business. What would we name a custom clothing company started by a retired teacher and a runaway fashion student in suburban Portland? I thought about Elena's face in the mirror, about the joy of creating something beautiful for someone who truly appreciated it, about Catherine's nervous laughter and Brenda's dismissive smile, and the years I'd spent making myself smaller to fit other people's expectations. Stitched stories, I said. Custom clothing by women who understand that every body tells a story worth honoring. Sophia's grin started slow and built like sunrise. Stitched stories. I like it. She pulled out her phone. I'm Googling business license requirements. Sophia, wait. Are we really doing this? She looked up from her screen, her expression shifting from excitement to something deeper and more serious. Mary, 3 weeks ago, you were a retired teacher whose daughter treated you like an embarrassing obligation. Today, you're a sought-after artist with a waiting list of clients and a TV interview scheduled for Friday. Tomorrow. She shrugged. Tomorrow we change the fashion industry, one custom dress at a time. The next morning, I woke before dawn and padded to my studio where Elena's dress hung on the dress form like a promise kept. In the soft light, I could see every stitch, every bead, every choice I'd made in the service of creating something beautiful. This dress would never hang forgotten in a closet or be dismissed as discount rack quality. It would be worn by a woman who understood its value, photographed by people who recognized artistry when they saw it, and remembered as the beginning of something extraordinary. I made coffee and sat at my sewing machine, surrounded by bolts of silk and boxes of vintage buttons and drawers full of thread in every color imaginable. My phone showed 17 new messages from potential clients, 3 calls from reporters, and 1 text from Sophia, found a commercial space downtown. Want to look at it this afternoon? There was also a voicemail from Catherine. Her voice tight with what she probably thought was concern but sounded more like frustration. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I really think you should be more cautious about this whole thing. Starting a business at your age, especially something so risky. Maybe we should sit down with Scott and make a proper plan. Call me back. I deleted the message without listening to it a second time. The Rebecca Thompson interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Elena's wedding was Saturday. And somewhere in between, I was going to have to decide whether I was Mary Sterling, the retired teacher with a harmless hobby, or Mary Sterling, the artist who'd spent 62 years learning exactly what she was capable of creating. But as I threaded my machine with ivory silk and began work on a dress for a bride who'd chosen me specifically because she'd seen Elena's photos and wanted something that beautiful and personal, I realized the decision had already been made. Catherine could keep her safety and her conventional wisdom. I was choosing revolution, one stitch at a time. The Channel 12 interview aired on a Tuesday evening in October, exactly 6 months after Catherine's wedding. I watched it from Sophia's apartment above the bakery, surrounded by fabric samples and business plans, while she provided a running commentary that made me laugh until my sides hurt. "Look at you," she said as my televised self explained the difference between machine-sewn and hand-rolled hems. "You look like you've been doing interviews your whole life." On screen, I demonstrated the beadwork on Elena's dress, now featured prominently in our portfolio, while Rebecca Thompson asked about my background. The woman being interviewed looked confident, professional, passionate about her craft. She didn't look like someone's discarded mother or retired teacher filling empty hours with busy work. Mary Sterling's story is remarkable, Rebecca's voice narrated over shots of my studio. After 37 years of teaching, she's found a second calling creating custom gowns that rival the world's top designers. Her waiting list now extends 8 months, and she's recently partnered with Sofia Martinez to launch Stitched Stories, a boutique specializing in custom clothing for real women's bodies. Real women's bodies. The phrase had been Sophia's suggestion, and hearing it on television made something fierce and proud unfurl in my chest. The segment ended with Elena's wedding footage, the dress flowing like liquid starlight as she danced with her new husband, her face radiant with joy that had nothing to do with expensive venues or designer labels, and everything to do with love celebrated authentically. Sophia's phone started ringing before the credits finished rolling. Within a week, we had 47 new inquiries, 3 requests from out-of-state clients, and an email from a documentary filmmaker interested in following our story. More importantly, we had signed the lease on the downtown storefront. Sophia had found a bright corner space with tall windows and enough room for multiple sewing stations, a proper fitting area, and a small gallery where we could display finished pieces. Catherine called the day after the lease signing. "Mom, I saw the interview. It was very nice." Her voice carried the particular strain of someone trying to sound supportive while calculating damage. "Scott thinks the exposure might be getting a little out of hand, though. He's concerned about you making promises you can't keep." I was pinning a bodice pattern to silk organza, the phone wedged between my ear and shoulder in a position that would have horrified my chiropractor. What promises would those be? Well, the 8-month waiting list. That seems unrealistic. And this partnership with Sophia, Scott did some research and her business experience is pretty limited. He thinks you might be making decisions too quickly. Scott thinks, as if my son-in-law's opinions carried more weight than my own judgment about my own life. Catherine, I've been making decisions for 40 years longer than Scott has been alive. That's not what I meant. It's just, starting a real business is complicated. There are liability issues, tax implications, insurance concerns. Scott could help you understand. I understand perfectly well, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. I understand that Sophia and I have built something beautiful and profitable in 6 months, while you and Scott have spent that same time trying to convince me I'm too old and inexperienced to know what I'm doing. Silence stretched across the phone line. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was smaller, more careful. "Mom, I'm trying to look out for you. By telling me to use synthetic fabrics and mass-produce trim. By suggesting I streamline my process to eliminate everything that makes my work distinctive. That's not looking out for me, Catherine. That's trying to turn me into someone safer, someone who won't embarrass you by dreaming too big. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work without immediately suggesting ways to make it smaller, cheaper, or more conventional? When was the last time you expressed pride in what I've accomplished without adding a but or a warning? Another silence. This one lasted long enough for me to cut 3 pattern pieces and begin arranging them on the cutting table. The documentary people called me, Catherine said finally. What documentary people? The filmmaker who contacted you. Margaret Wilson. She wanted to interview family members about your transformation. I told her I wasn't interested. Of course she had. The thought of cameras capturing her dismissal of the dress, of the world seeing how she treated her mother's gift, must have been terrifying. That's your choice, I said evenly. Mom, please. Can we meet for coffee? I think we need to talk face to face. I looked around my studio at the half-finished gowns hanging like promises on their forms. At the inspiration board covered with sketches and fabric swatches. At the business card Sophia had designed featuring our logo and the tagline, where every body tells a story worth honoring. I'm very busy these days. Perhaps after the holidays. Christmas was 8 weeks away. The suggestion hung between us like a door closing slowly but decisively. Mom. I need to go. I have a fitting at 2. I hung up and stood in the silence of my transformed life, feeling the weight of the choice I'd just made. For months, I'd been changing, growing, becoming someone new. But this felt different. This felt like the moment I stopped being Catherine's mother first and became Mary Sterling, artist and businesswoman, who happened to have a daughter. The fitting was for Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old widow who wanted a dress for her grandson's wedding. She'd been shopping at department stores for months without success. Everything was too young, too tight, too dismissive of a body that had lived 7 decades and earned every mark of experience. I don't want to look like mutton dressed as lamb, she'd said during our consultation. But I also don't want to look like I'm attending a funeral. The dress I designed for her was elegant crepe in deep forest green with 3/4 sleeves and a subtle A-line that skimmed her figure gracefully. Hand-sewn covered buttons marched down the back, and I'd added delicate beadwork at the neckline that caught the light without screaming for attention. When Mrs. Henderson emerged from the fitting room, she stood before the 3-way mirror for a long moment without speaking. Mrs. Sterling, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I look like myself, but the best version of myself. That's the goal, I said, adjusting the hem slightly. To honor who you are, not hide it. My daughter-in-law suggested I just buy something online. Said it would be cheaper and more practical. Mrs. Henderson smoothed the skirt with reverent hands. I'm so glad I didn't listen to her. As November deepened into early winter, Stitched Stories' reputation grew beyond anything I'd dared imagine. The documentary crew followed us for 2 weeks, capturing the process of creating custom pieces and interviewing clients who spoke with genuine emotion about feeling beautiful in their own skin for the first time in years. Sophia handled the business side with a competence that made me grateful I'd trusted my instincts about partnership. She negotiated with suppliers, managed our appointment schedule, and fielded media requests with the skill of someone who'd learned to hustle in restaurant work but dreamed of something greater. We hired 2 seamstresses, both women over 50 who'd been downsized from factory jobs and told their skills were obsolete. Watching them rediscover their artistry in our bright studio felt like witnessing resurrections. The space became a haven for conversations I'd never expected to host. Women talked about their bodies not as problems to be solved, but as stories to be celebrated. They shared experiences of shopping frustration, of feeling invisible in a fashion industry that seemed designed for other people, of rediscovering confidence in clothes that fit their actual lives. You know what I love most about this place? Asked Catherine Wilson, a 45-year-old attorney trying on a suit jacket I designed to accommodate her post-mastectomy figure. Nobody here acts like my body is wrong for existing. The jacket fit perfectly, professional and feminine, without trying to hide or overcompensate for anything. Catherine's reflection showed a woman ready to command any courtroom or boardroom, comfortable in her own skin and expertly tailored fabric. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, the story broke that changed everything. Pacific Northwest magazine ran a feature called The Seamstress Who Stole Christmas, a play on words that made Sophia groan but generated enormous attention. The article detailed my journey from discarded wedding dress to thriving business, complete with before and after photos and client testimonials that read like love letters to craftsmanship. But it was the sidebar that made my phone ring non-stop for 3 days. Under the headline, "The Dress That Started It All," the magazine had printed the full story of Catherine's wedding. How I'd spent 6 months creating a couture gown only to have it dismissed as discount rack quality by my own daughter. They'd obtained photos of both the dress and Catherine's reaction, though they'd had the courtesy to blur her face in the published images. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for the mom who turned rejection into revolution. Stitched stories began trending on Twitter. Fashion bloggers wrote think pieces about ageism in creative industries and the value of handmade craftsmanship. Most tellingly, orders poured in from women who specifically mentioned wanting to support a business that honored rather than dismissed their mother's generation. Sophia found me in the studio on the third day of media chaos, sitting at my sewing machine with tears streaming down my face as I worked on a simple hem. "Mary, what's wrong? This is amazing publicity. We're booked solid through next summer." "I know," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "That's not why I'm crying." "Then why?" I set down my needle and turned to face her. Because 37 years ago when Catherine was born, I dreamed of being the kind of mother she'd be proud of. I worked 2 jobs to put her through college. I sacrificed every luxury to give her advantages I'd never had. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that she was supposed to be proud of me, too. Sophia sat beside me on the small bench, her expression thoughtful. "You know what I think," she said finally. "I think you did raise her to be proud of you." But somewhere along the way, she forgot that pride isn't about having a mother who's convenient or conventional. It's about having a mother who's brave enough to become exactly who she's meant to be. Outside our studio windows, Portland's winter rain painted abstract patterns on glass that had become synonymous with transformation. Inside, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the evidence of dreams made manifest, I realized that Catherine's opinion, once the sun around which my world orbited, had become just one voice among many. And for the first time in decades, it wasn't the loudest voice in the room. The first snow of December fell on a Thursday. The same day Catherine finally came to see what I had built. I spotted her through the large windows of Stitched Stories, standing on the sidewalk across the street like a tourist studying a foreign landmark. She wore the black wool coat I'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago. Expertly tailored, expensive, the kind of safe choice that looked appropriate in any setting without making any statements about the woman wearing it. For 20 minutes, she stood there while I worked with Mrs. Patterson on a holiday dress fitting. Both of us pretending not to notice the figure in black watching from the cold. Mrs. Patterson, my old neighbor who'd become one of my most enthusiastic clients, finally broke the careful silence. "Isn't that your daughter out there? She looks frozen half to death." "Yes," I said, adjusting the hem of her burgundy velvet gown. "She does." "Well, for heaven's sake, Mary, let the girl come in before she turns into a popsicle." But Catherine didn't move toward the door, and I didn't cross the street. We stayed in our respective territories, separated by asphalt and 8 months of choices that couldn't be undone. When Mrs. Patterson left, bundled in her coat and carrying the garment bag with quiet pride, Catherine finally approached. She pushed through the door with the careful movements of someone entering enemy territory, her eyes taking in the transformed space. The gleaming hardwood floors Sophia and I had refinished ourselves. The custom-fitting rooms with their elegant curtains. The gallery wall featuring photographs of our work. "Mom." Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Catherine." She moved through the studio like someone touring a museum exhibit, pausing at the cutting table where I was working on a New Year's Eve gown for a client who wanted to feel spectacular at 68. The silver silk caught the afternoon light, and I watched Catherine recognize the quality of the construction, the complexity of the beadwork, the hours of skilled labor that had gone into every seam. It's beautiful, she said finally. Thank you. The magazine article. She stopped, swallowed, tried again. I didn't know they were going to write about the wedding dress, about what I said. I continued pinning the bodice, my movements steady and practiced. What did you think would happen when you dismissed 6 months of my work as discount rack quality? Did you think it would remain private forever? I was nervous. Brenda was being. Brenda. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to laugh. The words fell between us like dropped pins. Catherine flinched as if I'd slapped her. I've apologized for that. I called you. I sent flowers. You sent flowers to yourself, I interrupted. To make yourself feel better about hurting me. You never once asked how I felt. You never acknowledged what that dress represented. Catherine moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass that separated warm from cold, inside from outside. I know you're angry with me. No. I set down my pins and faced her directly. I was angry for about a week. Then I realized anger was just another way of making your opinions more important than my reality. What does that mean? It means I stopped caring whether you approved of my choices and started caring whether I approved of them. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 8 months of transformation. Outside, Portland's December afternoon painted everything in shades of gray and silver, while inside our studio glowed with warm light and the evidence of work that mattered. The documentary comes out next month, Catherine said abruptly. Margaret Wilson called me again. She wanted to include interviews with you and me discussing our reconciliation. Our what? Catherine's cheeks flushed. I told her we were working things out, that you'd forgiven me, and we were closer than ever because of what happened. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved with the fierce completeness that only mothers know, and felt nothing but a vast, calm clarity. You told a documentary filmmaker that I'd forgiven you without ever asking if that was true. Haven't you forgiven me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine's eyes held the expectation of absolution, the assumption that maternal love would eventually overcome any wound, that enough time and success would erase the memory of her cruelty. Catherine, I said gently, forgiveness isn't something you get to declare on my behalf. But you're my mother. Yes, I am. And for 62 years, I believed that meant I had to absorb every hurt, excuse every slight, and pretend that your needs mattered more than my dignity. But mothers are also human beings with feelings that deserve respect. Catherine's composure finally cracked. So you're never going to forgive me? I'm supposed to pay for one moment of weakness for the rest of my life. One moment. I moved to the gallery wall where photographs showed the evolution of stitched stories. From Elena's wedding dress to Mrs. Henderson's forest green elegance to dozens of women who'd found confidence in custom clothing. This wasn't one moment, Catherine. This was years of treating me like an embarrassment, of dismissing my opinions, of assuming your husband's judgment carried more weight than my experience. That's not true. When was the last time you asked my advice about something important? When did you last visit me without needing a favor? When have you ever introduced me to your friends as someone you're proud of rather than someone you have to explain? Each question landed like a perfectly placed stitch, holding together a pattern Catherine had never been forced to see clearly. She stopped, her hands twisting the strap of her expensive handbag. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe it doesn't need to be fixed, I said. Maybe it needs to be accepted as it is. Sophia chose that moment to return from her lunch meeting with a potential investor, her arms full of fabric samples and her face bright with cold air and excitement. She stopped short when she saw Catherine, her expression shifting to careful neutrality. Catherine, she said with professional politeness. How nice to see you. Sophia. Catherine's voice carried the particular stiffness she reserved for people she considered beneath her notice. I see business is going well. Better than well. We're expanding to a second location in Seattle next year. I watched Catherine process this information. Saw her realize that Sophia, the waitress she dismissed as getting above herself, was now my business partner in an enterprise worth more than Scott made in consulting fees. Congratulations, Catherine managed. Thank you. Sophia set down her samples and moved to the cutting table, her presence creating a buffer between Catherine and me. Mary, the investor loved your portfolio. She wants to feature stitched stories in her magazine's spring issue about women entrepreneurs over 50. Women entrepreneurs over 50. The phrase would have been unimaginable to me a year ago, when I was still defining myself as Catherine's mother and William's widow and a retired teacher filling empty hours with hobbies. Catherine watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't her mother's little sewing project that needed managing or improving. This was a legitimate business run by women who knew their worth and demanded respect for their expertise. I should go, Catherine said suddenly. I can see you're busy. Catherine. I stopped her at the door. I want you to understand something. I don't hate you. I don't wish you ill. But I also don't need your approval or your management or your version of looking out for me. So where does that leave us? I considered the question seriously, looking at this woman who shared my DNA but not my values, who'd inherited my stubbornness but not my respect for others' dreams. It leaves us as two adults who happen to be related, I said. If you want more than that, you'll need to earn it. Not through apologies or flowers or telling documentary filmmakers we've reconciled, but through actions that show you actually respect the woman I've become. Catherine's face cycled through emotions. Hurt, anger, recognition, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. And if I can't do that, then you can't. But I won't pretend otherwise to make either of us more comfortable. She nodded slowly, tears making her mascara run slightly, the same way Elena's had when she first saw herself in my wedding dress, but for different reasons entirely. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Catherine. The door closed behind her with a soft chime, and I watched through the window as she walked back to her car. She didn't look back at the studio, didn't pause to admire the elegant signs Sophia had commissioned, or the window display featuring our latest work. You okay? Sophia asked quietly. I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment above the shop. We'd converted the space when the lease on my suburban house expired, deciding that living above our work suited us better than maintaining the pretense of separation between art and life. The walls were covered with sketches and photographs, bolts of fabric organized by color and weight, and a single framed image, Elena in my wedding dress, radiant with joy. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Wilson. Documentary premieres February 14th on Netflix. The Seamstress, a story of late life transformation. Congratulations, Mary. You've created something beautiful. Outside my window, Portland's winter nights sparkled with lights from other people's windows. Other people's dreams being lived out in small acts of daily courage. Somewhere across town, Catherine was probably telling Scott about our conversation, seeking validation for her hurt feelings and strategic advice for winning back her mother's approval. But I wasn't her mother anymore. At least not in the way I had been. I was Mary Sterling, artist and entrepreneur. Woman who'd learned that love without respect was just another word for servitude. In the morning, I would begin work on a wedding dress for a bride who'd chosen me specifically because she'd heard the story of the dress that launched a revolution. She wanted something that honored both tradition and transformation. Something that would make her feel beautiful while telling the world she was nobody's compromise. I knew exactly what to create for her. After all, I'd been practicing that particular pattern my entire life.